My name is Natalie McKnight. I'm a pediatric hospitalist, and I'm also the assistant dean for faculty for our regional campus with UVA School of Medicine. So that means there are two paths. One side is faculty development, working with faculty and residents to become better teachers for our students. And the other hat, and what I'm going to focus on today, is the faculty affairs side of it, which has to do with faculty appointments and promotions and scholarships and things along those lines. So I am going to share a PowerPoint, but please feel free to go through to just, either raise your hand or just unmute and ask questions. Serena is going to be monitoring the chat just in case I have difficulty doing two things at once. But you can honestly feel free. I want this to be, the reason why we're holding this is because I want it to be an approachable session for our Inova Campus faculty who have questions about appointments and promotions. So I want it to be helpful and pertinent to you. So to get started, okay, so we're going to talk about promotion today. And let's see if it's going to let me advance my slides. Okay, so in terms of our objectives, we're going to differentiate between the different instructional faculty rank levels at UVA School of Medicine. I'm going to explain everything that I'm saying. We're going to talk about the timeline for the promotion process, which is a very long and extended timeline. And then also, I'd like you all to understand the structure of the key components of the P&T dossier, which is all of the materials that you submit for promotion. So first, the basics. So all Inova faculty with the UVA School of Medicine Inova Campus are appointed within the instructional faculty track at UVA. So this is obviously tenure ineligible. And the description of this track is that the majority of time of each faculty member within the instructional faculty track is devoted to teaching or service, clinical or otherwise. So because we are appointed at UVA School of Medicine due to our work with medical students, as opposed to our research work or even our excellent clinical work, we are within the instructional faculty because our appointment with UVA, regardless of whether the majority of our Inova time is this, our UVA time, if that makes sense, is with our students and teaching. And all faculty are appointed within the Department of Medical Education. So technically, a title is assistant or associate professor or full professor of medical education, UVA School of Medicine. Some people have asked me, does that delineate, like, is that a negative? Does that mean something different to UVA? And it does not. It's just an indicator that, again, the reason why we have UVA appointments and don't work at UVA is because we work with the students and are focused primarily on education, at least from their perspective. There are faculty at UVA School of Medicine that are faculty, assistant or associate or professors of medical education as well. So it's not just a title for UVA, Inova Campus. Does anyone have questions about that? Okay. So then we'll go through the ranks themselves. So assistant professor is what basically almost everyone is eligible for once they've completed their terminal degree. So a PhD or a medical degree or, MD, a DO, et cetera. As long as you are board certified, board eligible, working with students, then you can become an assistant professor. Many of you may be thinking about applying, I apologize for all the words, may be thinking about applying for associate professor. And there are a couple of criteria that I think are important. One is the time. So you can see here, I've highlighted in red, you have to have held at least 6 years at previous appointment. It does not have to be at UVA. Obviously, our regional campus of UVA is only 2 or 3 years old. So they take into account your appointments at other institutions, particularly VCU, those of us who have been with Inova for some time. But also, there are actually folks at Inova who are either new to Inova, coming from another institution, or also hold appointments at Georgetown or GW or other local universities. Those count as well. So as long as you've had 6 years as assistant professor, that's the first minimum criteria. You definitely need to show documented excellence in education. And I've highlighted the latter part of this statement, the extent to which these activities contribute to educational capabilities and enhancements at UVA School of Medicine, because one thing that we've come to realize, particularly during our second round of promotion for this campus, is that understandably, the UVA faculty folks really want to see that anyone applying for promotion is showing excellence with their students. So we expect to see evaluations from UVA students of you, and it's difficult because they're not actually required to evaluate all faculty, right? And so that's especially difficult for those of you that are subspecialists and maybe working with students during phase 3 or their 4th year on electives where they may or may not choose to evaluate. We can talk about, strategies if any of you have questions about that. But we do need to show that you are demonstrating excellence in education with the UVA student, in addition to everything else that you do if you do other things. Scholarship for associate professor is actually not required. It's encouraged, but not required. Obviously, anything that you do is included within the entire packet that's submitted to the P&T committee and any referee letters, and all of it contributes, but that is not a requirement for associate professor. For reputation, we ask that that you show that you have a regional recognition as an educator. So examples of that are, you may be on a committee of the Virginia ACP or AAP or whatever your organization is. You may have been invited to do grand rounds at local institutions outside of Inova. You may have been invited to do even national talks or on national committees. All of those things contribute to your reputation. And
question?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Right. What about those of us who work in specialties that do not get med students?
So anyone who has a faculty appointment should be working with medical students. If you are working with them in like a research, field, that counts as well. And we can talk about ways of getting sort of feedback on your role as a research mentor. For instance, perhaps submitting as a specially arranged elective, a block of research where then you can submit for an evaluation. Or if you're part of our summer research program, we ask students to evaluate the program itself at the end of the year, things along those lines. But otherwise, you have to have worked with UVA students in some capacity. I see there are other tabs out there. Do you want me to try to open it? Okay. Oh, working remotely, grading, etc. I don't think I understand the question. Can you clarify? Working remotely, if you're working remotely with students, then you're still working with them. Like, if you are teaching them or even working clinically, like if you're both doing remote work. If you have any clarification and I didn't answer your question, please feel free to ask again or to clarify. So that's reputation. In addition to your CV and everything that you submit, we'll go over the referee letter writers, which is an important part of the promotion process. They will also speak to your reputation as well. And it's one of their roles in the process. And then service. Obviously, if any of you are involved in UVA committees, like the admissions committee or curriculum or anything along those lines, that's valued highly. But we ask that you include all of your service to your institution of Inova, as well as UVA, as well as any national, professional boards or organizations. So that's all for associate professor. Similarly, for professor, it's the same categories, but the expectations are slightly different. You do need to have held 6 years as associate professor at either UVA or other institutions before being considered for promotion to full professor. And then, whereas for associate professor, you had to have documented excellence in education, professor, you need to show sustained excellence in education, and the extent, again, to which these activities contribute to UVA School of Medicine. So you need to have been an educator for some time and been an excellent educator for some time. For scholarship, it is required for full professor, even in the instructional faculty track. So you need to show not only that you are productive in the academic sense, but also that your scholarly activity is focused on education, on medical education, and ideally, given that we work with UVA students, on undergraduate medical education whenever possible. And I'm going to be honest, I think this is going to be really difficult for many people to achieve because most of us don't have, those of us with protected time to do significant research don't necessarily have protected time to do medical education research. So the professor rank will be, I think, more difficult to achieve than what we perhaps have previously seen. For reputation, whereas for associate professor, the expectation is a regional reputation. For professor, it's expected that you have a national or international reputation as an educator. So not just as a clinician, but actually as an educator. And then again, similarly, service is important as well. Service to your department, to the school, to the institution, and nationally. So the expectation for professors is that they hold national roles, you know, whether it means that you're the editor of a journal or whether you chair a subcommittee of your national organization, or you know, people know who you are and recognize your expertise. So those are the ranks. Shifting over to promotions itself. So when I say it's an expensive timeline, so we're in January, we're ahead of the curve, we're talking about it now. But it starts, you know, the first deadline is in April, as you can see, of this year. We don't get notified until late spring, early summer of the results. So it's a full year, slightly over a year actually, that you are working on this or thinking about it at least, even if not working on it. So right now you're doing the right thing. You're thinking about it, you're asking questions, and you're preparing yourself, hopefully updating your CV. Between March and April, that's when we welcome you to submit drafts of your CV, your personal statement, and your referee list, and we'll go into details about each one of those things afterwards. For feedback to our office, we are happy to submit them, and if there are any questions, we're also happy to involve experts in promotion at UVA School of Medicine in Charlottesville who've been very helpful in the process in the past. By April 7th, we ask that you've met with either your chair, your division chief, or someone within your service line regarding suggestions for referee letters. And again, we'll describe what that means later on. And that you have to submit to us your information by May 5th. Over the summer, after that stuff is submitted, you can work on your teaching portfolio and submit it for feedback. And that needs to be submitted formally in early August 4th. For review. So although the Medical Education Promotions Committee, which is comprised of both Inova faculty as well as Charlottesville faculty jointly in the Department of Medical Education, meets in September, the reason why we ask for an August 4th deadline is because we've realized that it's important to be able to provide feedback to candidates, because we really, if you're going to go through this process, we want you to be successful. We want to be able to identify early on if there are any issues and really make sure that you go through and that we help you fill any holes that there may be. And then afterwards, honestly, once you're submitted, although you are always welcome to go back and in fact encouraged to go back and update your CV, which then Serena can then update for, you know, with any additional activities that you've had. It's basically just a waiting game from September on. And if we ever ask questions of the P&T folks at Charlottesville, what they tell us is no news is good news. So if you hear from them, it means that there are questions, that they will need clarifications, which isn't necessarily bad news, but it just means that they might need some more information. And if you don't hear from them, then it means that you're passing through and that you're on to the next stage. And you really don't get, I went through this process 2 years ago. You don't hear anything until the very end. And then they tell you, oh, congratulations, hopefully. So again, March through May is when the provost, so UVA overall, not just the School of Medicine, but the university committee reviews candidates, and then they make their decisions, and then they formally announce it at that time. Okay, so the components of the dossier. The first main one is the CV. Your P&T CV should be a little bit more detailed than your standard CV. It's actually okay to include explanations or definitions when it's needed. These are just a listing of some of the things that they don't need to see. All of the information should be in reverse chronological order, and ideally with the dates on the right-hand side versus the left-hand side, because they feel like when dates are on the left-hand side, then it focuses more on the years of activity as opposed to the activity itself. So they want to de-emphasize that, the time, and emphasize what your role is. And the important thing to realize is that as opposed to like your regular CV, which that like generally is probably only reviewed by people who know what you're doing, the P&T CV is reviewed by a lot of people who are likely not within your specialty and ultimately who are not even in medicine, right? So when we get to the provost P&T committee. So that means, like I'm a pediatrician, I write AAP everywhere. I don't write AAP, right? I'm supposed to write American Academy of Pediatrics because that may not be obvious to someone who's not a pediatrician. And so in addition to you reviewing yourself, sometimes it's helpful to have someone not within your specialty review your CV so that they can tell you, I don't even know what this means. What does this mean? Because there are things that you are used to that they're not. And then this PowerPoint, Serena can send out to all of you. It has a link to the UVA format for the CV, and I think she's going to send you a copy of my CV as well if anyone wants to see it. The major thing, the issue that people, and it's not just an Inova thing, this is a Charlotte, this is an everywhere thing, is that you have to keep your CV updated and you have to not be humble. Like this is the time to include all of the things that you do. Like if you have mentees, which I'm sure you have, formal or informal, list them by name and you know who they were and what they're doing now, if you know what they're doing. If you've been on committees, you know, even if they're not formal committees, you know, on protected time for it, include the things that you do. And even if you're naming it, name the committee. Like I used to help out with, you know, when I was a clerkship director, I used to meet regularly at the end of each block with my counterparts at VCU to talk about grading. So I was part of the pediatrics grading committee because it was a cross-institutional committee, right? And all those things you need to include. And most people don't. So if you're wondering, should I include this? Then the answer is generally speaking, yes. Include all of the lectures that you give to medical students, residents, fellows, your colleagues, nurses, the community, etc. There may have been changes, or you may have had to pivot during COVID, and you may have had to come up with a different curriculum if you had learners. You may have been I don't know, created a podcast, like all those things, as long as they're, you know, medical in nature, should be included in your P&T CV. These are just some of the topics, the like headlines that they would like to see. I did want to highlight at the bottom for publications, if you've had any students or trainees at all that you published with, please underline their name. Your name should be in bold. But their name should be underlined because then that shows the committee even more evidence of your expertise in education because you are helping them with their scholarly activities. Within all of those sort of headings and subheadings, I just wanted to highlight the teaching activities since we are all instructional faculty. So that includes any classroom teaching, if you've done any clinical teaching. So include who you've taught, an approximate number of students, like the types of topics that you have discussed, the years, obviously, all of that stuff. For teaching activities, not in the classroom or clinical, these are some examples of items that you may have contributed to. Journal clubs with your residents, special lectures, grand rounds, developing curriculum or teaching materials, etc. I probably wouldn't just list, like if let's say you attend your annual organization, your national organization's annual conference, but you're not actively participating in as a committee member or as a presenter, I wouldn't necessarily say, oh, I like attended the AAP this year, because that's not as helpful. But if you have taken specific, like a certificate program or a degree program, certainly, but a certificate program or any specific teaching courses to better yourself or any courses to better yourself, then they do want to see that, even if it's not a formal degree granting program. So an example is I did a clinical teaching program through the AAP and Society of Hospital Medicine called APEX. And it was a 2-year longitudinal program. I got a certificate, but I didn't get a degree, but that's included for me in additional training. So I would include all of that stuff, okay? And then whenever possible, if you have teaching evaluations, then let us know. For the UVA students, Serena will be able to ideally help you obtain that stuff. So anything that you have, our office can help you obtain it so you can see what you have. And if you've worked with residents or fellows, hopefully their program manager or program director will be able to help you track that stuff down. Any questions about the CV? Okay. All right. So I briefly mentioned referees. So these are the folks that write letters that support you. Oh, wait, there might be a question in the chat. Okay, never mind. So anyone that you list as a referee needs to be at least at the rank to which you are applying or higher. So if you're applying for associate professor, they can be associate or professor. If you're applying to professor, everyone needs to be professor. We say a maximum of 20 referee names should be submitted. I would definitely recommend the full 20. And then 7 of these are external independent, and I'll describe the categories in a second. I also highly recommend that you have a backup list, particularly for independent referees, because we have no control. If none of us, you, us, no one, UVA has no control over who's actually going to write a letter, right? Like who's going to have the time and sit down and write a full letter, review everything, and you shouldn't be dinged for that. So what UVA does is if they haven't gotten enough of a specific category, they will reach out to you and let you know we need X number of names. And so it's much nicer to have those backups ahead of time, and you can actually submit them to our office, to me and to Serena, so that we have it in advance and we don't even need to bother you if you'd like. But that's going to be important. And then when we submit them, we have to say, does this name come from the candidate or from the chair or chief or whomever? So please discuss. That's why we added actually an extra deadline this year of talking to your department chair, division chief, or your vice chair for education, or whoever it is that you've identified within your department or service line that's going to be able to help you. Some ideas are the clerkship director or residency program director within your specialty may have some names. Some societies actually have a process by which you can request people that have never heard of you to write letters for you. I know ABIM has something, and I specifically like within the Association for like Women in Medicine, they have a method by which you can request referee letters to get those independent names. Concept, which is for pediatrics, they have a process by which you can request referees. And so people who work at more traditionally academic institutions are used to being asked to be referee writers. So it seems weird to put down names that maybe you don't really know to ask them to review your portfolio, but this is what they expect to do, and it's okay. It's expected of them. So in terms of the descriptions, internal referees is external referees. Yeah, I am about to go over the at arm's length versus that. That's a great question. So internal referees are people either at Inova or UVA, and their role is to comment on your expertise, obviously in clinical education, et cetera, and then your regional reputation. You cannot, for any of these, include current students or trainees because, for obvious reasons, you can't ask someone who's who you are supervising to write a letter of support for you. External referees are not part of UVA or Inova. And those can be people that you have worked with in the past. Like, let's say you went to residency with someone and you're at different institutions, or someone formerly worked in Inova with you 5 years ago, but now is at a different institution. So that counts as an external referee. And they are asked to comment on, as you can see, research, clinical education, significance of your scholarship, and then your regional or national reputation. And then the last category, and this is probably the most important one, is that at the at arm's length, or the external independent, is what UVA calls it. So this is the only one that has a minimum number of referees required. So there are at least 7 that you need to submit of the 20 are external independent, and a minimum of 3 people need to write letters for you from this category. So these are people that may know you, like hopefully know you, because hopefully they can talk and speak to your regional or national reputation, depending on what like rank you're applying to. And maybe you work together, like in terms of being on a national committee together or a conference organized or something like that, but you can never have worked together substantively. So never been at the same institution together, never, for us, affiliated with UVA or Inova, or potentially with UVA if it was before our partnership. Like they could have formally worked at UVA before we even became, partners with them. Can never have written anything together or, investigated it together at all. So, and I sort of stress this highly because we have had people submit the names that they considered external independent, and then the candidate is asked, oh, how do you know that? Do you have any prior work history with the candidate? Have you ever worked, how have you collaborated with them? And then they get sort of downgraded from external independent to just external. And again, you need 3 independent or at arm's length referees. So the referees, all they see is your CV, your personal statement, and then UVA's P&T criteria. And it's the same stuff that's on the website. Like the P&T criteria is basically what I cut and pasted onto the PowerPoint earlier, like associate professor and professor rank. That's all they see. They don't really see anything else. And so your CV and personal statement are important. Of note, UVA is somewhat unique in that they really do not want any candidates reaching out to potential referees. It is a little bit unclear to me why. I think it's mainly because they don't want any question of people feeling beholden to write a letter or anything along those lines. And so you submit the names to the office sends out form letters, and that's how they are notified. Some people may notify you, like I had people tell me, oh, I wrote your letter, Natalie, and all I said was thanks, right? But otherwise, there's no formal notification from UVA of who sends a letter or who doesn't send a letter, or even how many you have. The only, question is that sometimes we may ask for more names, and then oh, I probably don't have enough names. Some people didn't write letters. And as you can see, these are the questions that are asked. So the referees, I think, sometimes trip people up in terms of thinking of people who might be willing to write about you. And so if you have questions about that, then let me know. You can hit the chat. Okay. Okay, so we're going to be moving on to the personal statement. So the personal statement is just ideally 1 page, maybe a little bit over, for the maximum of 2 pages. And both the P&T committee members as well as the referee letter writers see this. It's basically your referees required. No, for assistant professor, actually, you don't need to do any of this. This is only for if you are applying for promotion to associate or professor. Anyone can get a assistant professor basically by submitting your current CV and like your demographic information, like your name, etc. The link that that Sarita sends. And then oh, that's a good question. So if you can provide proof, because there are some institutions that use instructor differently than other institutions. And so if you, oh, sorry, I'm just reading the question about the chat is that Kiran Balani was at a position where they held the rank of instructor previously, but that it was essentially equivalent to assistant professor. It may depend on the institution and on how easily attainable that criteria is found, so that we can submit that for P&T review. But we would need to sort of provide proof that that specific institution has criteria that is substantively similar to the assistant professor criteria in order to have it count towards the 6-year total. Yes. Yes, basically any questions you have, just let me know. And we encourage people to ask, and we reach out to Charlottesville frequently actually before having people go through the whole process. We really only want people to even go through the process if we feel strongly that they are going to be able to be successful. These are great questions. So if there are more, feel free to, again, unmute or write in the chat. So for the personal statement, it's basically a page or two that tells people who you are. It's your opportunity to provide context to all the bullet pointed information that you have in your CV. So include your accomplishments, include what you're doing now, include what your goals are, and don't just restate your CV, and include sort of a description. I think in my personal statement, I talked about how at one point I was involved within sort of more our division or hospital administration as the associate medical director, and then I realized that I wanted to move into education, and I sort of pivoted, and I talked about that in my personal statement as an example. You don't need to go into too much detail because again, it's only ideally a page or two, page and a half, the recommendation is that use an active voice rather than a passive voice. So this is a narrative statement, sort of telling people who you are. I have heard folks who are on various P&T committees basically say that you don't want to, it's similar to when you're advising students who are applying to residency, right? You don't want to annoy anyone reviewing your portfolio. So longer is not necessarily better. So around a page or a little bit more than a page is typically considered sufficient. And again, this is your personal statement and your CV are the only things of yours that are seen by your referee letter writers, when they write your letter, okay? The other major portion of your entire dossier for promotions is the teaching portfolio. So this is basically used to just provide even more detail and documentation regarding your educational activities. So there is a lot of similarity between the information that you include on your CV and the portfolio, but there's just a ton more information in your portfolio. In fact, there is a maximum number of pages, 30 pages, to give you some information. And in addition to the portfolio, we actually, they typically ask for 3 publications that you get to choose of yours. They do not have to be peer reviewed. If you don't have any substantive scholarship, you can include a poster that you've done, you can include a curriculum that you've developed, you can include the slides from a workshop that you've given, for instance, to go along with the portfolio. So there are a number of sections of the portfolio. First, there's a brief introductory statement, much shorter than the personal statement, that's focused on your work within education, the percentage of your time that's devoted to teaching, et cetera. And we have examples of all of this for you to use. And then, I'm not going to read all of these, but they just ask you for a lot of detail for everything else, your direct teaching activities, your teaching awards, your curriculum development, anything that you've done with assessments, all of these things, educational administration and leadership, mentorship, and professional development in education. So yes, There's a question in the chat about whether we can obtain letters from prior trainees of evaluation. Yes, within the appendix of the portfolio is where we include things like not only the summary of, let's say I got an average of 4.5 out of 5 by all these students at various institutions, but also here is a summary of some of the narrative remarks that narrative comments that they made about me. So, you know, we have Georgetown students that rotate through pediatrics, inpatient pediatrics. And so I included that information in the appendix in addition to UVA and VCU. I will say that they definitely want to see, and this is all information that we're learning as we go. They definitely want to see UVA student feedback. So it is not sufficient to just have VCU or Georgetown or other institutions feedback. That is helpful and will add to the fullness of your sort of dossier and portfolio, but you definitely need UVA student feedback in order to be considered for promotion. And if that's been difficult, then, you know, we've talked about within our group, within our office, how to help people do that. And I think the only next slide is like questions. So I think I'm gonna take myself off. I'm gonna stop sharing. So if you are thinking about promotion, if you are like a phase 3 elective, you know, course director or something, then it's okay to ask students to write you an evaluation. Like they're not required to, but it's okay to say, hey, do you mind writing an evaluation for me? Because I'm thinking about going up for promotion next year. It's also okay to notify our office that you're considering promotion and that you are like a phase 3 elective director, so that and these are the students that you've worked with, so that we can reach out and ask students to write letters or write evaluations for you on their behalf. If you do research, then I would encourage you to take students on as especially part of our summer research like program with UVA students, because then you get a student for 8 weeks or so, which is great. But also we ask them to evaluate the program, and starting this past year, we've asked them to evaluate their preceptors as well, so that you can have some information for promotion. If you're part of the clerkship, as long as you have had a certain minimum number of students, like in the 3 to 5 range, write evaluations about you, then that counts. But again, we can similarly ask any students that you've worked with to write an evaluation for you, and that is considered okay. Any other questions?
Dr. McKnight, I was just wondering if we could see a show of hands in the Zoom of how many people think they're still interested. So I can make that list. I think our next steps would be for you to confirm with us in an email that you are still interested, and we'll try to book some kind of mutually acceptable time for you to meet with Dr. McKnight, send us your CV.
Great, awesome. A few people. So yes, so you work mostly with residents and fellows. And again, I would include all of that. I included my resident teaching, you know, evaluations. If we'd had a fellowship at that time, which we do now, I would have included my fellowship, teaching evaluation, and include any work that you do with the residents and fellows. Depending on what level you're applying for, associate versus professor, helps determine how significantly involved you have to be with the UVA students. But regardless, you do have to have at minimum a show that you are an excellent educator for UVA medical students.
Okay, because I guess my concern has been that my specialty doesn't get medical students. And so obviously, so I tried to do the review, which is the review medical student, the presentations that they submit, the third year medical students, and I'm one of the reviewers for that. But at the same time, I do a lot of education at the national level, for fellows, residents, and that's just because our specialty doesn't get any of those.
Can I ask? I forget what is your
so
specialty?
I'm neurocritical care.
Okay.
And we recently started. we just recently started the neurosurgery residency program. So we get
Yeah.
those 3 months of the year. And
Yeah, of
I
course.
think we got our first 2 medical students last month.
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, all the UVA students are required to do critical care. They don't do a neurocritical care.
Right, exactly.
Because
because it's super subspecialized for them. And so unless they've asked for that rotation, they don't really get it.
Yeah.
And so that really limits our exposure to them, but that doesn't mean that we're not part of education or writing or other peer review productions in our department. And so what can we do for somebody who is kind of like almost isolated from students and even like get residents only a couple of months a year? What can we do to try to get a UVA promotion?
Yeah, so the main thing would be, so the reason why neurocritical care doesn't have students is because they require, for any of the critical care and medicine courses, it's required to be, you're required to have a residency, like there would need to be a neurology residency program. So if there is ever a neurology residency program at Inova, you probably would be able to become part of the critical care and medicine required courses. In the meantime, what you just said, if you have an elective, which you can be super subspecialized and have an elective for students, and there may only be 3 students that go through, but if they all write evaluations for you, then that counts, you know? In addition, if you're interested in any, like there are a number of committees with UVA, most of which are currently filled, but they all have like 2 to 3 year sort of timelines for turnover. And we're almost 3 years into this relationship with UVA. And so soon we're going to actually be needing new people to join things like our curriculum committee, our OSCE committee, our various committees. So all of that will show evidence of education. And we also have a relationship with UVA in terms of medical education specifically. So there's an associate dean for scholarship and innovation, basically. He has many more words in his title. But he is involved in medical education and in encouraging faculty involvement in medical education on both campuses. So that would be another way to get involved. If you do any research, I would highly encourage, so for the summer research program, you don't have to have a formal lab, for instance. Like there are people who who want to write up a series of case reviews or who want to do a literature review. And that's a great thing for a student to focus on for 8 weeks over the summer and to help you do that work. And again, you would be able to get an evaluation from them based on that work as well. So we can talk offline maybe about potential ways, because you do have to show, again, work with students, with UVA students in order to meet criteria, even though we include everything that you do, like your residents and fellows as well.
So then if you don't have that, would you recommend going forward for this year, or would you say
no? I would definitely wait. And sorry, I had a meeting with the basically Dean of Faculty Affairs in Charlottesville about this, and the Senior Associate Dean for Medical Education. And they really want to see work with UVA students and at least some proof, like they need to see at least an evaluations from students saying, oh, this person is doing great with us in order to apply for promotion. And so I definitely would not recommend, I would recommend updating your CV, because it's always helpful to update your CV so that when you do decide to apply for promotion, it becomes much easier, but I wouldn't apply without that information. Oh, and Serena put some information as well. Creating elective, volunteer to be career advisor. Let's do it. Exceptions are for formal promotion. I don't believe exceptions are made for promotion. So when I have spoken to them previously, there is not a way to sort of fast track. Like even if you meet the other criteria, they expect to see 6 year at current level before applying to the next level.
So when you say 6 years, do you mean that, let's say I will be eligible for the 6 years next year when they make their decision? Do I start applying now, or do I have to wait 6 years before even applying?
So the first committee that reviews this year, right? So if you're applying this year, then in September, the Department of Medical Education would review and they look at your timeline. So they would want to see that you've done 6 years by September when they are reviewing your CV. So if you've done that, then great. If it's like not until 2024, then I would actually probably wait, because I think that even though it's difficult, like I think that it's better to be sort of a slam dunk than to make people question whether you actually meet criteria, and then they'll look at everything else much more closely, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? I see hands up, but I'm assuming that's in response to Serena's question of whether you're still interested in promotions. But if any of you actually have questions, then also just unmute or write it down. Oh, yes, we'll share the slides. I think Serena was going to email them out to everybody. But we will definitely share the slides. And again, like, I am happy. I know many of you have sent me CVs, and so some of which I got today. So I obviously have not reviewed all of them, but I'm happy to send them back with my thoughts on how the P&T committees would assess your sort of portfolio based on your CV alone, and how to best sort of highlight your work. Because I think sometimes there are like little things that people forget to include. But I'm also happy to meet individually with people to discuss if you're interested in applying for associate professor or full professor, and either ways in which we can optimize your sort of dossier now in preparation for applying the next year or two, or just to discuss whether I think this is a good idea now. We are lucky enough to have gone through basically 2 cycles. So I think we have much more information now than we did previously on what they are looking for when they're reviewing applicants. Okay. If you guys don't have any other questions, then thank you so much for joining. I'm going to give you 11 minutes of your time back. And you can always, my email is, it's natalie.mcknight@inova.org. You can feel free to email me at any time, or you can schedule a meeting with me. If you CC Serena, she's much more likely to be efficient with getting it done, so that we can meet if you'd like. And then generally speaking, once there's a small group of people that are interested in applying for this year and are really working on it, we try to meet regularly with that small group throughout. So you have like a cohort of people that have been through the process, that are going through the process, that you can work with and you can sort of share your portfolio with, and you can, and I think that has been helpful as well. Okay, thanks everybody.